Good morning and welcome to the JADE Investments Limited investor presentation. Throughout this recorded presentation, investors will be in listen-only mode. Questions are encouraged and can be submitted at any time by the Q&A tab situated in the right-hand corner of your screen. Just simply type in your questions and press send. The company may not be in a position to answer every question it receives during the meeting itself. However, the company can review all questions submitted today and publish responses where it is appropriate to do so. Before we begin, I'd like to submit the following poll, and I'd now like to hand you over to John Croft, Executive Chairman. Good morning to you, sir.
Right, good morning, and thank you everybody for dialing in. First of all, I'll start with an apology. I'm on the move, and the internet connection where I am is not particularly good, and that's why, unfortunately, you can't see me on video. But hopefully, we can deal with the presentation and the questions and so on effectively, in spite of that. Yeah, so thank you for joining. So I wanted to give a bit of an update on where Jade Road is. We've been through a number of changes over the years, and we're in the process of some very significant changes as we speak. And it's a good opportunity, really, to update our investors, shareholders, and the market on what we're doing. So I'm just going to cover some recent updates. At the end of the presentation, there is some additional information, which I'm not proposing to present formally, but it's just really for additional information for you. For example, some information about the board of directors and so on. So just a bit of background. Jade Road, over the last number of years, has in its portfolio a number of what we're describing as legacy assets. And these assets are almost exclusively private equity style assets in Asia, and a lot of them are in mainland China. And it has been extremely difficult, to get the market to appreciate the potential value of these assets. And also, we've been in disposal mode for some time in terms of trying to get these assets realized into cash. And it takes an extremely long time, and it's very difficult. And we're dealing with China, which is notoriously difficult to deal with. So we've made some decisions to effectively remove all of the legacy assets from Jade Road so that we end up with a clean vehicle that we can use to raise capital and to make new investments. So in terms of what's been going on recently, we've been in the process of cutting our costs, streamlining our operations. We are in the process of divesting legacy assets, and moving all of the legacy assets out to a separate vehicle, which will be an SPV, and then establish a new investment strategy going forward, which is focused on global risk-adjusted returns, and then completely relaunching the company. And this will be done through a shareholder vote, which we're expecting to issue a circular to shareholders before the end of January, which will provide all the details of the restructuring. So the sort of assets that we are interested in are what we call genuinely alternative assets, and these can offer much higher returns and relatively low risk. And that's why we find them of interest. And we are working closely with a group called Heirloom Investment, and they've been running funds for a number of years focused on these type of assets. And that has been a source of potential new investments for us for some time. So looking at the traditional alternatives and what we're calling genuine alternatives, you can see on the little table below that we expect that we can deliver much higher returns and relatively lower risk than some of the other asset classes, such as hedge funds, private equity, and venture capital. So in the recent past, we announced just around the end of the year the plan to transfer the legacy assets to a special purpose vehicle, which is called Eastern Champion Limited, but its name doesn't really have any particular relevance. And what will happen is that existing shareholders of JADE will receive an in-specie dividend of SPV shares, meaning that they will own shares in the SPV, which will be equivalent to their holding in JADE. So if a shareholder, for example, currently owns 5% of JADE, post the reorganization, they will continue to own 5% of JADE, but they will also own 5% of the Eastern Champion SPV. And the SPV will return capital to its shareholders from the disposal of legacy assets as they happen. So and once the priority creditors have been paid, essentially JADE has bondholders who are owed, their face value of their bonds is $3.6 million US. And once those bondholders have been repaid, any subsequent disposals and free cash after operating expenses will be available to be issued as dividends to those shareholders of the SPV. And the result of all of these changes is that JADE effectively will be a clean vehicle without the legacy assets involved, and that will be a vehicle which will be a lot simpler to present to the market and to raise new capital for. So in 2023, we made a couple of investments in line with our investing strategy, and the most recent of those was a small investment we made in the Heirloom Litigation Fund. This is an interesting business which basically finances small claims through UK courts. These are typically for things like missold insurance policies or landlord situations where, for example, a tenant is experiencing mold or something like that in their building, and they're entitled to make a claim against the landlord. All of these types of transactions or claims are ones that are prescribed in terms of the potential outcome. So what that means is that as long as the claim fulfills the main criteria to be a successful claim, then the chances of success are close to 100%. So these are a lot of small claims, and the other advantage of the claims structure is that all of the claims are also insured to minimize any downside risk. And JADE receives a 1-year 14% cash interest debt note from Heirloom Litigation Finance for this investment. And we like this type of investment. It is a good example of the type of returns that we're looking to achieve in the vehicle. And as I think people will be aware, we have a close relationship with Heirloom, which is the company's largest shareholder. We also made an investment earlier in the year in the Heirloom Investment Fund, which is a fund which has been around for a number of years and delivers significant and consistently good returns for its holders. It's managed by Heirloom Investment Management, and it offers a diverted portfolio of asset-backed and income-producing investment. And these investments are exactly the type of investments that we aspire to continue to invest in the future. So that concludes the main part of the presentation, just to try to provide an idea of where we are at JADE and the status of our transition to an investing company focused on these globally risk-adjusted returns. But I know that we have a number of questions that have been submitted prior to the presentation, and I wanted to be able to talk to them because I think they're good questions, and but the answers to those questions will provide the listener with a much deeper understanding of exactly where we are and where we're heading. So at this point, I'll conclude the main presentation, and then we'll move to the Q&As.
Perfect. John, thank you very much for your presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, please do continue to submit your questions just by using the Q&A tab, which is situated on the top right-hand corner of your screen. John, as you mentioned, we have received a number of pre-submitted questions from investors, and I want to start off the Q&A session with the first one here, which reads as follows. What is the company's view on how to close the $20 million net book value what is the company's view on how close to the $20 million net book value will the legacy's assets be sold at?
Right. So we're confident that the last set of results that we produced, which was back in June 23, is a fair reflection of our view of the NAV of $20 million. Obviously, one could reasonably think that since the value of the legacy assets, which require no further investment, is 20 million, it would seem odd to take them off the balance sheet. But the reason is that it is hard to raise money for the company that holds Asian assets with little synergy, which are illiquid and unlisted. And this has been a problem for us, ongoing problem for a number of years. So the message that we've had from the market is get rid of your assets and then come back and talk to us. So this is the main reason why we've decided to move the assets out of JADE, so that they no longer tend to cloud the picture of where the company is headed.
Perfect. Thank you very much. The next question here, will JADE do any of its own investing directly into companies, or will JADE solely invest in Heirloom Fund going forward?
So as I've mentioned, JADE is very closely aligned with Heirloom, and we may continue to invest in Heirloom products, which have a strong track record. However, we also plan to make our own independent investments, and we could also look at co-investing with Heirloom in order for JADE to achieve higher returns than it would get simply by investing in Heirloom funds. JADE's investment mandate and the strategy is to invest in high-yielding alternative assets, and we are looking across the board for opportunities that meet those criteria.
Perfect. Thank you very much. When will dividends from Heirloom be passed through to JADE shareholders?
So JADE will be able to distribute dividends to its shareholders when it is of sufficient scale, and the issues that I've mentioned earlier have been things that have restricted JADE from growing. However, the SPV that will own the legacy assets will make distributions to its shareholders once the corporate bonds of $3.6 million have been repaid by any sale proceeds from assets held or sold out of the SPV. So we have $20 million worth of assets. We're in the process of disposing of all of them. And once the $3.6 million has been repaid, there will be free cash available to distribute to shareholders. If there were no proceeds forthcoming from those assets, then the corporate bond, and the debt will have been moved to the SPV, so that in effect it's no longer JADE's, or will no longer be JADE's issue.
Perfect. Thank you, John. What mechanisms will be in place for JADE and its existing shareholders to monitor and benefit from the monetization of the legacy assets?
So JADE shareholders, as I covered in the presentation, will receive an equivalent share in the SPV that will continue to own the legacy Asian assets. So that is where they will get a distribution as the assets are sold.
Thank you very much. There are many more established funds in the alternative asset space. What is JADE's unique selling point?
So I think the big selling point for JADE is that its association with Heirloom, which has an established and excellent track record, shown by their 5-year IRR of 25%, and it invests primarily in alternative asset classes. I'm not aware of many similar funds on AIM, although there's a small peer group of UK listed companies in the space that do invest in high-yielding alternative assets, namely Gresham House or Rockwood, HG Capital and Oakley, to name a few. But we see our relationship with Heirloom as being the main USP that we have, given their consistent track record and the fact that they will continue to support the company in the future.
That's great. Maybe just following on from that, why does Heirloom need JADE?
So Heirloom has made a significant investment in JADE. Anybody who's been following the company for the last year to 18 months will know that they've effectively underwritten or supported all the recent fundraisers. And they now own just over 50% of the company. So obviously they have a very vested interest in its future. And I personally work very closely with the Heirloom team on planning the future of JADE and how we're going to make it successful. So, and the key there is to grow JADE into a company of significant size that can deliver high returns to its shareholders. And I'm confident that with their assistance, we'll be able to be successful doing that.
Perfect. Turning to the next question, what mechanisms will be in place to manage the potential conflict of interest between Heirloom and JADE's shareholders?
Okay, so I'm sure many of the listeners will be familiar with AIM rules, but essentially the rules require that any related party transactions are reviewed by the company's nomad to ensure that they're fair and reasonable from an independent standpoint. Investors may be concerned that if the largest JADE shareholder is also solely valuing the underlying assets, but Heirloom is a company which has been around for a number of years. They're a fund. They're independently audited. They have regular independent valuations of all of the assets. So we shouldn't have any concerns about the valuations of the assets that are held within Heirloom. And as I mentioned, any transaction involving JADE and Heirloom requires a detailed review from an independence point of view by the nomad. So I think that whole process should provide shareholders with some comfort that valuations are the right level.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Burford Capital came into trouble on how it valued its underlying assets. How does Heirloom's approach differ to reflect changes in valuation throughout a litigation process?
So I don't want to say too much about other companies, and the basis of this question, I think, is because of our recent investment in the Heirloom litigation fund. But our opinion is that Burford Capital profitability has been up to now heavily tied to a particular large claim that was won against Argentina relating to the YPF Repsol expropriation. And this has a large collection risk. They were also subject of a short seller report by Muddy Waters, criticizing governance structure and valuations methodology of its assets. These events were a number of years ago, and the company seems to be recovering somewhat and performed reasonably well last year, I think. The difference with Heirloom's litigation finance business is that it's really very different in that it consists of a high volume of relatively low value claims that settle quickly and have a high success rate. All claims are also insured to ensure minimal downside risk. So actually, although from a headline point of view, both of those are in the same or similar space, they're actually very different. There's also some other litigation finance businesses in the UK. There's an AIM-quoted one called Litigation Capital Management, but I'm not really aware of any others. So we particularly like this space, and we think it's a good opportunity to deliver high returns for our investors and shareholders.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Can you explain how and why the company will need to further execute its new investment strategy within 12 months, as the divestment is deemed a fundamental disposal under the AIM rules?
Yes. So for those who've read our recent announcement regarding the restructuring, there is a reference there to the fact that the company will need to demonstrate that it's continued to implement its investing policy in 12 months. This is an AIM rule, which is a little bit vague and is open to interpretation. But essentially all it means is that we'll have needed within the 12-month period to demonstrate that we are executing our investment strategy. But in our case, that could simply mean making one or two more investments in the space that meets the criteria, and then the portfolio of the company will clearly be in line with the investing strategy. So as I say, it's a little bit vague, but we were advised by the Nomad that we needed to make this statement, and that's where it comes from. But doesn't cause me any problems or concerns about being able to comply with that requirement in the next 12 months.
Perfect. Thank you very much. What is the anticipated timeframe for the liquidation of the legacy assets? Have these been written down to a worst case basis?
So I'm expecting some significant disposals in 2024, but others may take longer to realize. Significant write-downs were taken at the end of 2022, and the directors believe that the carrying values in the balance sheet are a fair reflection of realizable values.
Perfect. The next question here. After the transfer to the SPV, there'll be virtually no assets left in the company, but rounded up 400 million shares and NAV of 0.1p. How do you expect to carry out the proposed business plan?
That's a very good question, and I can only say that we are looking to acquire some significant assets in 2024, and we're working on this closely with Heirloom.
Thank you very much, John. Next question here. Would it not be better to liquidate the company rather than go through the cost of a reorganization?
That's also a good question, and it's something that we, the directors and our advisors, look very carefully at before moving down the path that we are moving down. And the reason that we don't believe that the liquidation of the company would be the right thing is because it would not deliver anything near fair value for the shareholders. because in a liquidation scenario, the realizable value of the legacy assets would be seriously diminished. And as soon as I hope people would understand, as soon as the market was aware that the company was effectively in a fire sale of its assets, the value that we would be able to obtain in selling those assets would be severely impaired. And that's why we decided to move down the strategy that we're taking and putting the assets into a separate vehicle with no particular end life, but with a specific intention of extracting maximum value from them and then returning the value of those sales after repayment of the debts to its shareholders. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Will you be able to hold the legacy assets in an ISA?
I don't think so. However, on tax issues, obviously shareholders should take their own advice. But our understanding is that all AIM shares can be held in an ISA. So JADE Road Investments PLC will continue to qualify. But the SPV, however, that holds the legacy assets will not be quoted on AIM. And, from that perspective, I think highly unlikely to qualify since it also will not be a UK domiciled company.
Perfect. Thank you very much, John. That concludes the pre-submitted questions. We have had a number of questions come in live throughout today's presentation. And if I could just ask you to read out those questions and give responses where it's appropriate to do so, I'll pick up from you at the end.
Okay. So the first one is, can you comment on your approach to your exit strategies for investments and what consideration are factored in, particularly with regard to the timing of an exit? Okay. Well, the answer to that, I guess, is that we are actively trying to dispose of all of the assets that we have, and each of them is very different in terms of its nature. So some, as I mentioned earlier, will take longer than others. It's extremely complicated dealing with assets in China, not just from the point of view of dealing with local authorities where necessary, and dealing with buyers who maybe have a slightly opaque strategy, but we're also dealing with the issue of getting money offshore as and when sales are made. So they're highly complex situations, and we've been working extremely hard and closely in trying to dispose of our assets, going through some very, very detailed processes to negotiate, agreements, SPA agreements with buyers, and then finding ways of structuring things so that we can get money offshore. So I hope that answers the question. But if it doesn't, maybe the person who asked the question could submit a subsequent follow-on question. So in the meantime, there's another question here. The new strategy appears similar to JADE, so it's not clear what the need for another vehicle is that is much smaller, illiquid. Okay, I'm not familiar with JADE, but our strategy is not looking at other companies. It's dealing with the situation that we find ourselves in, and trying to find the best solution and a future strategy for the company which will benefit our shareholders. So we're not necessarily looking at other companies to see whether they have a different or better strategy than us. We're just trying to extract the best possible value for our shareholders from our current situation and our assets. Then there's another question here. How does the board manage the relationship with Heirloom such that minority shareholders are not particularly disadvantaged? So I did talk in some detail about the sort of regulations and how they effectively provide rules and regulations and balances around, how we work with a third party like Heirloom that is a related party. But I think the other answer is that given Heirloom's position as a majority shareholder, everything that they do is in the interests of them, is therefore also aligned with the other shareholders, because if they benefit from it, then so do all the other shareholders. So I don't have any concerns on that particular point. Then there's another question here. The board and the company has a checkered history and has clearly delivered poor outcomes compared to prior indications. It is challenging to raise money on AIM. The recipe here looks somewhat unrealistic to raise significant funds. What time frame do you see to assess if this is realistic? Okay, I mean, I take that point completely. I think everyone's been disappointed. I would be one of the first in the queue to be disappointed. I think having an investment strategy with focused on private equity assets and predominantly in China has clearly not worked out, and it's been a very rocky path. So no excuses for that. But I think that because of what we've done and because of our relationship with Heirloom and with this particular restructuring, we are creating effectively almost a shell company which can move forward with some assets and with a clear strategy and with a very supportive partner. And we believe and hope that will change the picture for JADE, and that we will be in the position to execute our investment strategy in a much more significant way during 2024.
Perfect. John, I think you've actually managed to address every single question from investors today. And of course, you can review all the questions submitted today, and we'll publish those responses on the Investor Meet Company platform. But just before redirecting investors, provide you with their feedback, which I know is particularly important to the company. John, could I just ask you for a few closing comments?
Yes. Well, I mean, I'd just like to thank everybody for attending today. We are expecting to be making some significant additional announcements in the near future, and I hope that those of you who have committed to attending this webinar will keep an eye on developments, and we're always happy to talk further with investors and to have other opportunities to interact and tell our story. I'm very open to talk to anyone at any time. So I'm happy to have a dialogue with shareholders as they see fit. So thank you for attending.
Perfect. John, thank you for updating investors today. Could I please ask investors not to close this session, as you'll now be automatically redirected to provide your feedback in order that the management team can better understand your views and expectations. This will only take a few moments to complete, but some shall be greatly valued by the company. On behalf of the management team of Jade Road Investments Limited, we'd like to thank you for attending today's presentation, and good morning to you all.